The story opens in the kingdom of Roidalis, a world where, 100 years ago, monsters began to appear and spread miasma, corrupting the land. Only the saint possessed the power to heal the tainted earth and protect the people from these creatures. Her prayers and barrier alone could save them. In the town, bards sang tales of the time when, for 80 long years, the land had been forsaken by the gods due to the absence of a saint. Now, thanks to the traveling saint, Lady Mira, peace like never before had returned. Meanwhile, townsfolk were gossiping about the rumors of Prince Arthur and Lady Mira's engagement. No one was sure, but with the upcoming ceremony celebrating Mira's one-year stay in the country, many believed the announcement would be made then. The scene then shifted to Mira, whose maid came to inform her that breakfast was ready. Mira thanked her and followed her through the halls. She shared with her that, even though the purification was going well and the barrier was still stable, she could sense the number of monsters increasing with every passing day. She only wished to do everything she could to ease the people's fears. The maid sympathized with her and mentioned that her engagement to the prince would surely bring joy to the citizens. Just then, some guards appeared, and Prince Arthur himself had come to see her. Mira bowed gracefully to greet him, but then all of a sudden, the prince struck her and shoved her backward. The maid rushed to help her and demanded to know why he was acting this way. The prince coldly reminded her not to speak to him so casually, and with his single command, all the guards raised their swords toward them. He accused Mira of being a false saint, claiming that according to the high priest's testimony, her powers were proven to be fake. The maid protested, insisting that countless people, including the prince himself, had witnessed her miracles. But the prince ignored her and revealed that a true saint, born in their own kingdom, had just been discovered, and Mira had merely been pretending all along. Declaring her a fraud, he ordered that she would be banished from the kingdom at once. Mira quietly asked him if this order was from the king himself. The prince hesitated for a second, then said that since the king was bedridden, he was acting as regent, so his words were the king's words as well. He told her she should be grateful he was sparing her life and was not dragging her away with embarrassment. Mira said nothing more and left with her maid. Outside, a crowd had gathered as a knight announced that Lady Mira had stolen the powers of their nation's true saint, Marielle, and for impersonating a saint, she was to be banished. The high priest, accused of aiding her, would be stripped of his title and imprisoned as well. As Mira walked down the steps, the townspeople watched in disbelief. Many were confused and could not understand why this was happening. Some wanted to hear her side of the story as well, unsure whether to believe the accusations or not. But when she stayed silent, they started doubting her as well. Soon they turned on her, calling her a fraud and accusing her of deceiving them. One man raised a rock to throw, but another stopped him, warning that they might be cursed. Just then, Mira turned around and the crowd froze in fear, but she simply bowed gracefully and wished them a good day before walking away. After leaving the town, her maid, Tuil, asked why she hadn't tried to defend herself, saying the punishment was too cruel. Mira simply replied that it was pointless. People had already made up their minds and wouldn't listen to what she had to say. Tuil insisted that the citizens would have believed her if she had spoken because what no one knew was the fact that Mira was actually the third princess of the Eda's kingdom, Princess Mira herself. A flashback showed how she had begged her family to let her travel the world as a saintess rather than live as a princess. Her mother had been against it at first, fearing for her safety since she was only 15, but after much pleading she eventually agreed. Before Mira departed, her mother taught her that a saint's duty was not just a singular one. In time, a new saint was going to be born in Roidalis, and until then, she told her that must be a saintess who loved and was loved by the people. Mira promised to bring peace with her powers. That was how she met the king and his son, Prince Arthur, who had welcomed her warmly, until now, when his true nature was revealed. Returning to the present, Mira knew she could have proven her innocence any time by displaying her powers in front of everyone. But she also understood that Arthur would never accept it. His pride would not allow him to be contradicted. If she resisted, it would only lead to violence and innocent soldiers would suffer, which was the last thing she wanted. Still, she couldn't help but feel bad, remembering how kind and gentle Arthur had once seemed. Deep down, she had hoped to one day reveal her true identity to him and remain by his side as the saintess of this land. But that dream had just shattered completely. Now, with her faith in him gone, Mira decided it was time to return home to Eda's. Since a new saint had been born in Roidalis, she understood that her barrier was no longer needed and keeping it would only hinder her own powers, so she used her magic and lifted the barrier that she had put around that city. With that done, they decided to head out immediately, as the journey to the Eda's border was going to be a long one. But first, they needed to make some preparations in a nearby town. Tool suggested they should head to the Adventurers Guild and find someone who could protect them from monsters and rogues. They needed to hire someone who could serve them as an assistant because from here on out, the road was going to be a wasteland. And so, without wasting any more time, Mira bid farewell to that town and headed out. Later on, as they came out of the forest, the next town was finally in sight. Their destination was the border with Ada's, and they were now approaching Tongtrace, which was the nearest town to the capital of Roydalis. Once they reached the town, they went to a hotel, where Tuel came up to her, handed her some new clothes, and requested that she get changed, as it was time for them to head to the guild. When they arrived at the guild, there were many men present in there, and as soon as she entered, they all began staring at her, as if they already knew who she was. Meanwhile, Tuel went to the receptionist and asked if she still remembered the request she had made earlier. The receptionist confirmed that she did remember the request for an assistant to the Ada's Kingdom border and informed them that there had actually been a sudden increase in assistant requests over the past few days. She mentioned that she did know someone who might be able to help them, but he was away at the moment and would only return the next day. Mira grew a bit worried upon hearing that, while the other men ominously approached her, asking if she was really in such a rush. One of them offered to guide her, even for free. However, Mira simply smiled and told them that she could wait until tomorrow, as she was not in a hurry at all. She started walking away from them, but one of the men chased after her, asking why she was acting so distant. Then she used her magic and slammed the door shut behind her, causing him to crash face first into it. He and his friend stood there, wondering what had just happened. When they came out of the guild, Mira had already left, and they lost sight of her. Upon returning to their room, after witnessing how much the public order had changed in just one town, Tuel expressed that it would be best to leave the territory of Roydalis as soon as possible. Many people had already heard about the Faint Saint incident, and if they stayed too long, there was no telling what kind of people might come after them or what could happen. More importantly, Mira asked her how she was paying for the hotel and the clothes she had bought, since she thought Tuel had no money, just like her, after leaving the capital. Tuel informed her that when she left Ada's, her mother, Lady Ada, had entrusted her with some precious metals and told her to use them as a travel fund in case of any unexpected situations. She had never imagined she would actually need to use them this way. Mira was touched to hear how much her mother cared for her and wondered what her brother would think about all of this. She had just informed him about her engagement not long ago, and now, all of a sudden, she had been banished from the country. Tuel stated that such an act would not be forgiven, not only by King Lloyd, but also by Lady Ada, her sisters, the citizens, and herself. She also mentioned that back at the guild, while they were making their requests, she had overheard a detailed rumor about this new, genuine saintess. Her name was Marielle, the reputed daughter of Dallow County. She was 16, the same age as Mira, had golden hair and blue eyes, and was faintly aware of her powers, unconsciously manifesting miracles that supported the country. But then, the false saintess appeared, stealing honor and obstructing her efforts. That, according to rumor, was the story about Mira, and it seemed many people had already started to believe it. However, what Mira could not understand was why this saintess had only been discovered now. Tuel replied that Marielle was said to be the orphan child of the Count's brother. 10 years ago, the Count's territory was attacked by monsters. The brother was killed, and his child went missing. Later, the Count managed to find his brother's child, who had been taken in by an orphanage. It was around that time that her powers began to manifest. Mira recalled that 10 years ago was also when the southern kingdom of Lide was destroyed. With the guarantee of the high priest, it was possible that everything had been planned. But then Tuel reminded her that there was only so much the crown prince could do. Besides, this was a country that had long been preparing for betrayal. She told Mira there was no need for her to burden herself any longer for the sake of this country. Mira simply smiled, agreed with her, and decided to leave the rest to her brother. With that, they went to sleep to get a proper rest before their long journey. Later that night, Mira woke up, thinking to herself that within her barrier, other saintesses were unable to manifest their powers properly, including her mother and sisters, with whom she shared the same bloodline. Whether it was due to her own inexperience or a matter of compatibility, she still did not know. Looking out the window, she felt as though she had entered an entirely different world in just a single day. Thinking about the incident that had occurred 10 years ago, she recalled that the kingdom of Lidi had also possessed a saintess. However, that kingdom was destroyed overnight, and as a result, countless refugees and monsters had overflowed into the neighboring countries. It would still take about 10 days for the full effect of her barrier to disappear, and she felt worried, because once her barrier vanished, if Marielle failed to overcome the monsters, the entire country would be doomed. Even though there was no longer a place for her here, she wondered if there was truly nothing she could do. The next morning, they left the hotel. Seeing that Mira still looked sleepy, Tulle apologized for providing such poor accommodations, but Mira assured her it was not a problem. She also asked her not to call her princess until they returned home, and Tulle agreed. Later, when they arrived at the guild, the receptionist informed them that their assistant had returned. She quietly whispered to them, assuring them that they had nothing to worry about. This person was very different from the others, and would not make any strange requests. The man who was to assist them back home was sitting right there, and his name was Rawl. Later, as the two ladies followed Rawl, he led them to an isolated alleyway and then looked at them, saying that a noble girl with troubles was indeed a rather good contract. Both of them were stunned, and Tulle quickly got on her guard, ready to fight to protect the young princess. However, Rawl asked her to calm down and clarified that's what most townsfolk would think when they look at them. He was not going to expose their identities to anyone, but it was clear that their mismatched dirty cloak over a clean outfit would for sure attract attention. So he simply told them that if they wanted to avoid all sorts of trouble with the scoundrels before they reached the border, they should stick close with him, and they moved ahead. Later, he took them to a state shop which many adventurers used to gear up before their journey. It was a perfect shop where they could buy whatever they wanted since it wouldn't leak to anyone. He bought Mira a cloak, and even though she liked it, it had cat ears and she found that really childish, but Rawl told her that she looked great in it. As for Tulle, he asked her if she was going for a swordswoman look, and she answered that it was just a part of her spoof. Meanwhile, Mira looked at herself in the mirror, still not liking the cat hood, and was fixing her hair when Rawl advised her that she should not take off her hood. Otherwise, her silver hair would stand out too much. She agreed that he did have a point there, and she had never really thought about that before, so she used one of her magic and changed the color of her hair. Rawl was quite surprised to see that, as he had never seen someone do that with magic, while Mira, in her mind, understood that she could not let him figure out who she really was. So she simply chuckled and stated that it was one of the implementations of her magic. He looked at her with suspicious eyes and commented that it must be quite convenient. Putting that aside, he informed them that walking to the Ida's border would normally take at least 10 days to 2 weeks. However, the roads ahead had gotten a bit rough due to recent bad weather, so it could be that it might take them a bit longer than that. Therefore, he advised them to choose their food that had a good shelf life in order to lighten their load. And so, after finishing their preparations, they decided to finally head out. Later on, as they were on their way, Mira thanked Rawl for everything he was doing for them, and confessed that all this was actually new to her, while he, on the other hand, did not care about her sentiment and just said that he was doing this because her fee was fair. Out of nowhere, he asked her if it was rare. She did not know what he was talking about, and he pointed out that it was his first time seeing that color of the sunset. Speaking of colors, she noticed that he had red hair and tan skin. She knew where those types of people generally were, and she asked him if he was from the kingdom of Leda. He went silent for a moment, and then responded that he already knew who she was, the saint who turned out to be fake, and was now fleeing to the countryside. Mira acted dumb and did not admit that she was the one who everyone was talking about, and said that she had heard about those rumors as well. But now that the false saint was exiled and even the high priest confirmed it, she believed that now the true saint should be welcomed right away. However, Rawl expressed that he does not think there would be any banishment riots due to the saint. He was certain that everyone would turn to the saintess and would say that it was time for evil to be wrought by the saint herself. But whatever the case, the land where that chaos erupts always tends to fall into ruins. The exiled might curse in vengeance or malice might spread disaster. But even with all that, the ones who were smart would just quickly escape. So in short, to answer her argument, he believed that the arrival of the true saint does not guarantee anything. As a matter of fact, even the saint's own justice was not absolute, nor the believers', hence, it was very much a possibility that this country might also be destroyed. Mira was simply speechless. As they kept moving forward, they reached a dead end where a bunch of people had stopped as well. Turns out, the heavy rains had loosened the ground ahead, and although it was slightly passable, it was still risky and full restoration would take months. Many people there decided to just backtrack to another route. So Mira and the group went to an inn nearby to plan their next move, and Tulle briefed them that they could still circle around on foot. However, like the man said earlier, it was dangerous because the area might still collapse. The mountain path, on the other hand, was treacherous and had unpredictable weather as well, which was, of course, yet again dangerous. Since they did not really have many options, Mira suggested they should take the safest bet right now and just hide in this town until the roads were restored. Raul did not have any problem with that, as he would only be getting extra reward for the extended assistant mission. With that said, he left the room, and Tuel also suggested that they should prioritize avoiding unforeseen issues because even if their communication was cut off, Reloid would just send someone to look for her. There was also the option of them joining her. However, Mira brought up how she strongly believed that people should not fight in this world. She was certain that sooner or later, Loidelas would not be able to escape scrutiny over this incident. But even still, her brother would likely hold his anger back and try to find a compromise. In the turbulent future of Loidelas, the citizens were still not sure of their strength. Hence, even if she did not rush things, she was sure that things would unfold. Yet even so, she did not think that she should be staying there anymore. If rumors of her exile were to spread even further while they sat there, delaying their journey, she was afraid that they could twist and reach the other's ears in an antagonistic way. When that happens, she was not so sure if her brother would be able to maintain his calm judgment even then. That was why she needed to quickly convey a message to him, telling him that she was safe and did not want a conflict. However, Tuel pointed out that the fact remained, all this was a result of Loidala's actions. He was the one who told her that she should be the saint who loves people and was loved by the people until the true saint was born. But Mira simply stated that she had vowed to her mother she would be the kind of saint who would not ignore the rest just because she had lost her place. As she said that, Raul was just outside her room, listening to all that. Besides, they still had her brother who she was sure would be searching all over Loidalas for her since he still did not know where she was right now. Tuel could not argue with her, as she had a feeling she would say that. So coming back to the topic, she informed her that there was another route that was mainly used by lumberjacks. It was a relatively gentle detour, and even though it would take them some time, it was still quicker than waiting for months for the landslide to be cleared. Mira felt a little bad as she understood that Tuel could have easily crossed that mountain if she was not tagging along with her, but Tuel was not thinking like that at all and said that since she had been her private assistant for almost her entire life, she had been taught to do it this way. Nonetheless, Mira insisted that she would just take the detour with Raul, while Tuel should lead the way on the mountain path. To give her brother the message, she was counting on her to do that by splitting up here. She decided to go talk with Raul and inform him about all this, who, by the way, was still right outside her door, listening and thinking that all this would be adjusted in his fee. The next morning, arriving outside the forest, she handed Tuel the letter she wanted to give to her brother, who planned to send this message with the guild's courier on the other side of the mountain. As for this route, there were adventurers and travelers who were using the same route as well, hence, they could easily blend in with them to disperse any danger. Before leaving, Mira apologized to Tuel as she understood full well that with this plan, she was the one who was facing the greatest danger. In response, she just hugged her and told her that ever since they met in childhood, she had never been apart from her, and that was not going to happen now either. And with that, she finally went her own way. As she left, Raul called out to Mira and asked her why she trusted him so much, agreeing to go alone with him through this forest. With a smile on her face, she simply answered that she could tell his true nature was really kind, and he was left at a loss for words. At that moment, he realized that she really was quite the remarkable young lady. As they both continued moving through the forest, they reached a point where they could see the woodsman hut, and it marked the boundary where humans had cleared land to pass through the mountains and forests. The path was not so simple, and he asked her if she was ready for it. She, on the other hand, already looked exhausted and was not even walking straight anymore. She just wanted to get flat grounds in their path, since hilly areas like this were clearly not something she was used to, and the strain on her legs and lungs was getting quite intense. Raul gave her all the options they could take from there. With plenty of breaks, they could camp twice over 3 days, they could take a longer route with fewer ups and downs, or they could just head back to town to restock. The final decision was hers, and after hearing all that, she promised she would do her best. However, even though he complimented her for her high spirit and determination, he asked her not to push herself too hard and took her hand to help her out. Later at night, they set up a campfire to have some dinner and rest for the night. He also informed her that once they passed this square, the path was all going to be downhill from there, the exact same type of path that she wanted earlier, but still, he warned her that the descent could throw her off, so it was not really a walk in the park. Furthermore, he mentioned that they should also prepare for encounters with monsters as well. The further they were getting away from the capital's barrier, the chances of them getting attacked by monsters were also increasing. On top of that, even though adventurers and soldiers may fight monsters, they could not purify corpses like a saint does. Mira simply remained silent and finished her meal. Later on, while she was sleeping, Raul looked at her and thought back to what she said about him earlier, that he seemed like someone whose true nature was very kind. Turns out, the one who had destroyed his country was the real saint, and as he continued to stare at her, holding a knife in his hand, he said out loud that he was not who she was thinking he was. We then get a little flashback of him from a few days ago, and in the guild, there was a huge commotion related to a quest. A lady was requesting some adventurers to help her out, and a group of 3 men appeared in front of her, assuring her that she can leave that to them. They told her everything about themselves and bragged how they always take responsibility for anything that happens to their client. Meanwhile, Raul just went to the receptionist to ask if there was any new quest for him. She was really happy to see him, as she had a perfect request that only he could complete. It was about assistant immigrants who were heading to the Ida's kingdom border. He asked her why she was saying that this was something only he could do, and she answered that the guild had a duty to treat their clients well, but they were usually short on manpower. On top of that, this client did not seem like just a naive girl who seemed to have wandered in. They were genuinely relying on the guild due to some circumstances, and if that was the case, she could not really give this kind of quest to those 3 idiots who always keep bragging about themselves. Raul thought about it for a moment and then told her to tell the clients to wait for a day. He was very curious about the rumor that the Saint of Loidas was a fake, and so he wanted to gather some more information on that matter and guessed that these 2 clients could be the false saints in Turridge. She agreed to pass that on, but she also pointed out that they don't really know about their schedule, and if they truly were in a hurry, they might just find someone else with connections and leave town. However, he was not worried at all and stated that it would be reckless for them to go around with anyone and everyone. Therefore, he knew that they would wait. With that, he left the guild, and as soon as he left, those 3 men came up to her, asking her what she was talking about with Raul and if she had any more interesting quests for them. Meanwhile, as Raul stepped out of the guild, there was a huge commotion outside as well, and everyone was talking about the rumors that said Mira was a false saint, and she has already been exiled in the morning by the Prince Arthur. The majority of them were cursing Mira, saying that they would never forgive her for impersonating as a saint out of all people. However, there were also some who discussed that something was feeling off. Apparently, everyone seemed to know about this rumor, but where did it come from? Nobody knew about that. Yet none of them delved on it, and they all supported the prince and the new true saint Marielle. While Raul, walking past them, observed that it was not so much shock or anger that was spreading among the people. A fake saint could easily mimic the powers, and in this world, where everyone was struggling, it was hard to tell what that trickster would do now that they had been banished from this land. But at the same time, as he looked around, he knew that it was all the same, and no matter what happens, this country was cursed. Prime example, some men were chasing after a woman, trying to hurt her, and then he quickly stepped up and knocked all of them down, saving the woman. She thanked him and offered to pay anything that he wanted to be her guard. However, he shouted at her and told her that she should not rely on him at all. He agreed to get her to safety but advised her that she should be choosing her allies more wisely. While in his mind he could already see that without a saint, the world could not hold together for much longer because she was the only one who could stop the growing monsters. There were many doubts among people now whether the saint was even fulfilling her duty or not, but the truth was she was keeping the peace. And so the next day when he finally met his client, as soon as he saw Mira, even though she was trying to disguise herself, he immediately recognized her, Princess Mira of the Ida's kingdom, and she was the true saint. Coming back to the present the next morning, the 2 of them reached a small town where they had decided to stay for a day. He suggested they should finish their meal before sundown and then restock their supplies before leaving tomorrow, while she, on the other hand, was just wondering if Tuel had crossed the mountain unharmed and was already on her way to the next town by now. As they were walking through the streets, Raul noticed some men in hoods staring at them with suspicious eyes. He also got on his guard and told Mira to stay back for a minute. She asked him if something was wrong, and he simply stated that he would be back soon. He went ahead, leaving her alone, and she was just thinking how nice it was to see Raul finally eating in peace. After spending 3 days in the mountains, she knew that he must be exhausted from keeping watch at night and maintaining the fire. Meanwhile, those men in hoods were watching her from afar, and Raul was keeping a close eye on them. They made their move and went up to her, surrounding her from all directions, and asked her if she really was Mira. They removed her hood, and turns out it was somebody else that they accidentally went after. Her hair color was different, not the silver one that they were aware of, and they realized that that was not Mira. Meanwhile, Raul grabbed Mira's hand and told her there had been a change of plans. Instead of spending the night in the town, they were going back into the mountains and going even deeper until they were out of sight from the town. He recognized the badge those men had on their back, and it meant that they were the private army of Count Diallo. From the looks of it, they were looking for the fake Saint Mira, and although he did not know their intentions, judging from what they were doing, it seemed they were checking faces of all the women who had similar stature. Mira was just confused and wondered how they even got there with the road being blocked by a landslide. And on top of that, the Earl's territory was supposed to be on the capital. Raul guessed that they must have galloped through the lower route, the same one that they did not take. Plus, he also saw a different horse that was tied up on the outskirts, and it was a breed that was mainly suited for mountains, confirming that they had quite the solid arrangements. So it was going to be another night of camping for them, and he suggested they should move further in first, otherwise they would be spotted when they light a fire. But then she stopped him and asked him if he knew that the men were searching for the fake saint. Why did he help her to get out of there so quickly? Raul stayed silent for a moment and confessed to her that he had actually known from the start she was the true Saint Mira of the Ida's kingdom, and was not a fake saint like everyone had been calling her. Turns out, Raul did not hate all the saints. The world of plunder and violence that he was thrown into was very terrifying for a weak and foolish kid like him, and he had nothing to rely on, so he only tried to survive without fulfilling anything. He always wanted someone to save him, and whenever he was faced with monsters, the only thing he could think about was how he should have never let go of his brother's hand back then. If only he had done that, he would not have been left alone in this world like this. Because of that small action, he had no father, no mother, no brother, and no hometown. He wanted to believe in saints because he knew that he was not strong enough to trust himself anymore. The other night, when Mira was sleeping in front of him, even then he was thinking about how she was one of the reasons why he was in this country, because she was a true saint, and even when she had been cast away as a fake saint, she was confident enough to trust him enough to sleep so peacefully like that, even though she had just met him. Because she had unwavering confidence, she could trust others. And in that moment, he finally remembered why he was able to recognize her at first glance when they met. Long before, in his homeland Lydie, before that certain saint appeared who destroyed everything, the former Ida's king personally led the army to help the Lydie kingdom, which was struggling against monster attacks. Raul also wanted to thank him, but he was so overwhelmed by his presence, all he could do was hide behind his brother who was interacting with him with dignity as a member of the Lydie royal family. Back then, there was this girl who was being held tenderly by the king. It was none other than Mira, and even though he only looked at her for a second, that memory was printed in his mind. And so, coming back to the present, he apologized to her for pretending that he did not know about her identity all this time. But Mira, on the other hand, was feeling really embarrassed and could not even look him in the eye, as she felt bad for lying to him, even though he already knew her identity. She realized how stupid she must have looked and how disgraceful it was, so she apologized to him, explaining to him that she needed to keep her identity secret. To make things right, she formally introduced herself to him as the third princess of the Ida's kingdom, and he was happy to hear that. With all that out of the way, they decided to start over properly this time, while he contemplated that if he could just deliver her safely back to the border, one day he might be able to express his gratitude from that time, and maybe he could finally hold his head up a little. A flashback is then shown, and the scene shifted to the king's palace, who shared with all the nobles present in that room about the last saint who was born about 80 years ago in their land Loidalas. Although she married the king's younger brother at that time, she suffered greatly because her powers as a saint were minimal and were only limited to just producing basic charms. Unlike the noble-born saint who was born before her, she grew up in an orphanage, and because of that, she faced harsh comparison and discrimination. Even the king of that time hesitated to acknowledge her as a saint, and so they never had children. Now it had been ages since a saint was born in Loidalas, and many people and nations began to believe that it was the punishment for oppressing the last saint. This nation was also called a cursed nation, which was abandoned by the gods. The king had recently heard that a healing saint would be soon traveling around to various regions, and he declared that he intended to ask her to stay in this land so that eventually his son Arthur could build strong relations with her. The king simply wished for his people to walk towards a better future together, a future where they could wipe away the foolish acts of the past that were done by this nation's leaders and people could truly regain hope. Arthur smiled and agreed with his father. However, shortly after, as soon as he got back to his room, he let out his true feelings and was feeling irritated by this whole idea. To him, The saint was merely a person who had just gained special powers, yet his father was bowing to them as if they were a god or something. On top of that, to think that all of this was due to events from 80 years ago and calling it a curse, he found it really stupid. Almost everyone had the same mindset as him, but the king and the populace were just pitiful, and he believed that was the true curse. So he decided to take matters into his own hands and govern this saint properly. That was the reason why he always acted so nice in front of Mira, staying by her side and showing her his kingdom. But in his mind, he still could not digest the fact that just because she was a saint, she was receiving royal treatment even though she had no home or family. His father was the one who was giving all these orders, and that also included that he would have to take her hand and accept her as his wife. Just thinking about that possibility made him laugh. And so, as time went on, one day he finally got the information from one of his men that a saint had been found who, even though had not been officially recognized yet, she was just taken from the orphanage to a count's house. Her name was Marielle. The man planned to visit there with the high priest and a few more people to conduct a thorough investigation himself, since he had also heard that she was originally of noble birth, but she had lost her parents. Arthur gave him the permission to do that, telling him that he should not let anyone know about this right now and report every detail of this investigation to him. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. He started laughing at this whole situation because of how ridiculous it was and had found a saint who was in fact a noble as well. But then he controlled his excitement as he understood that he still needed to proceed with caution as there were still many uncertainties revolving around this whole thing, and he needed to reshape it perfectly to fit his script. He wanted to be the center of everything, the one who provides hope to the people, and for that to happen, he decided to spread the rumors so that when the time comes, he could make this thing as grand as possible. He started off by twisting this information and sharing it with the knights, which left them completely confused and not knowing what to make of it, while he on the other hand planned to stir up the suspicions even more because then, once the structure of conflict was established, Mira would lose all her standing, and the only one who would be in support of her would be the maid that she brought with her upon entering this country. As for all the politics, he had nothing to worry about either since his father's health was failing, which meant that he was getting more in control, and soon his ascension wouldn't be far off because he even knew the prime minister as well and was sure that he wouldn't oppose him in this. As for the temple, he paid a visit to the high priest who, after doing his investigation, confirmed that their hunch was right. It was the first time a saint had been born in this country in 80 years, and he hoped that she would bless the whole nation. Arthur was glad to hear that, and since that was the case, he instructed the high priest to testify that Mira was a false saint and a criminal who deceived their nation by taking Marielle's position. The high priest was shocked and stated that there's no way he could tell a lie like that, seeing that he was not ready to cooperate. He commanded his guards to seize the high priest. They immediately obeyed, and the priest questioned them if they had any idea what they were doing. They had no right to act so recklessly as he was appointed to this position by the king of Loydelis himself. However, Arthur simply smirked and informed him that he was the acting king now, which made his words the king's words. As the guards took away the high priest, Arthur assured his men that he did not need to worry about the successor because he had already found someone who, even though was of lower rank, she was from an impeccable noble family, fit to bear the high priest's name. Plus, he also did not want the citizens to see the former high priest's disgrace, so he decided to make sure that no matter how loudly he shouts, his voice never reaches the ears of the people, that is, until he wanted them to hear his voice. And with that, his script was finally complete. The people who felt betrayed by the false saint mourned and raged while Arthur and Marielle, who looked like the ones who were deceived, would get sympathy from people, and all of them would rally to serve the king of this new age. He planned to eliminate all unnecessary elements that might hinder this vision of his, which obviously included both Mira and her maid, and wanted everything to belong to him only. Now 3 days had gone by since Mira was banished from the country, and Arthur barged into Marielle's room, who was keeping herself surrounded with servants, using them as literal slaves. She wished him a good morning, but he on the other hand yelled at her and questioned her what she was doing since it had already been the 3rd day. She proudly informed him it was a tea party that she was hosting right now, and after that, they were going to have a nap party this afternoon as well. He asked her why she was still hiding from the people and was just sitting in this temple, changing different clothes, eating and indulging even though she had prepared the tutor. Not only that, she was keeping so many caretakers, a private chef, a court jester, and even a home coordinator for herself. He reminded her that she needed to fulfill her duties as a saint first, instead of doing all this remodeling of the place. However, she argued that living in the temple also meant getting along with the priests as well, and she had learned so much about everyone's favorite things: flowers, colors, tea flavors, and secret snack hiding spots. Some of them said that Abunis would grant their wishes if they stroked his chin. Arthur was starting to lose his patience with her, and he once again reminded her that her job in this city was primarily to ease the people's worries. He needed both their presence to inspire the people and make them forget their fears. That was just the first step if they wanted everyone to accept them, and so he told her to get ready for a quick appearance. She laughed and assured him that he did not need to worry at all, as in her mind, she had also come up with a way how she was going to greet everyone. She wanted this big stage with her cute photo in the back where she could finally make her debut and make people excited, while Arthur warned her that if she gets too excited, he would smack her. As he left her room, he could not believe that it had only been 3 days, and his script was already falling apart. Just after banishing Mira, he was able to captivate everyone with a heartfelt speech, and during that moment, the excitement was so much that some people even fainted for him. But judging from how things were going now, he was afraid that the enthusiasm would die soon. The priest wondered if it was some sort of backlash that she had from living in an orphanage for too long. He heard that she was quite the spoiled kid, and the fact that she had not shown herself to the people could be attributed to travel fatigue and change of environment. However, Arthur was not too sure about that because, to begin with, she was not even showing any signs of her noble upbringing, and even the false saint who wandered around everywhere had far more dignity than her. He blamed the priest and questioned him about what he was doing, since he had granted him the position to smooth communication and control within the temple, and it was his responsibility to not let her have her way. In response, he simply apologized and explained that he had gotten too busy getting all the priests back to their duties. The distance was far too different from Mira's time, and by the time he had realized, she had already won them over. Half of them were manipulated the day she arrived, and just like that, the entire group fell under her control in just a single day. Hearing all that, Arthur decided to do some investigation once again, and he instructed his men to send a surprise inspection to the orphanage where Marielle was. With that said, he also decided to have the tutor stick even more close to her and correct her sleeping habits. But then, the priest informed him that there was actually one more issue regarding her: the monsters that were surrounding the royal capital. They seemed to be lurking just outside the castle walls, just waiting for their prey so that they could attack. It had spread much among people, and adventurers and merchants could not even enter easily anymore. Arthur assured him that this increase in monsters was not something he had not anticipated, and he had already issued orders to strengthen the patrols. Nonetheless, it all came down to a saint's barrier. The priest also believed that this change in the monsters' movements was likely because Mira released her barrier from the capital when she was banished. But still, her power was so strong that even the remnants of her barrier were keeping those monsters at bay even now. But in the end, all of this was just his speculation, since the priests could not wield the power of the saints, and all they could do was just speculate based on past experiences. Arthur then asked him how long he thought the aftereffects would hold, and the priest guessed that at most, it might take 10 days. Since that was the case, it was now even more urgent for Marielle to demonstrate her strength to repel the monsters in place of Mira, and he started considering giving that spoiled idiot a kick. Later, he took her to the prayer hall, which was going to be her main workplace, but she still kept throwing tantrums and said that she did not want to work in a place like this, which looked so old and scary, and even the flowers were not cute. He made her sit down and told her that she must do her job as the saint and deploy the barrier immediately. Furthermore, he had prohibited all the priests from entering there to avoid distraction, but to keep her happy, he had brought her favorite cushion, slippers, and an aromatherapy set. With all that set, he asked her to do it right now. But she, on the other hand, was concerned with her tea party that she had promised the other priests. He straight up told her to cancel it and focus on the barrier, but then she argued that some of them could not sleep without her whispering voice. Of course, Arthur did not care about that, and once again told her to just do it. So she finally agreed to try putting up a barrier, and he was curious to see how she would handle this. But then she nervously chuckled and asked them, how does one even cast a barrier around the whole city from there, leaving both of them completely confused. Later on, Arthur was thrown into a panic when his butler informed him that the King of Adis himself had come to visit and was already waiting in the VIP room. Arthur demanded to know why he had been allowed inside without permission, but the butler explained that there was an agreement between King Roydla and King Adis. Both rulers were to be admitted whenever they visited, without needing to give a reason. This was the first time Arthur had ever heard of such an arrangement. Just then, Marielle appeared and cheerfully wished him a good morning. She had also heard that the king from that eccentric country, Idas, had arrived, and she assumed he must know all about the saints. Since Idas was famous for having multiple saints, the thought excited her. Perhaps she could learn some hidden secrets, or even a way to power herself up. She was eager to hear his story. Arthur, however, grew increasingly irritated with her carefree attitude, especially since she was not capable of much. Still, he couldn't help but admire her determination to learn. He reasoned that it might not be such a bad idea to have the true saint introduced to the king, as it could be useful for future plans. Therefore, he allowed her to accompany him into the VIP room, but he firmly reminded her that she was only to observe closely and follow his lead. Marielle, excited, agreed without hesitation. As they reached the doors of the VIP room, Arthur couldn't help but reflect on how many unexpected things had been happening ever since he had met Marielle. Yet there was one thing that had been bothering him for a while, an unsettling feeling in his heart that he could not quite understand. That unease only deepened as he finally came face to face with the king of Idas. The king welcomed him warmly and introduced himself as Riloid, the ruler of Idas. Arthur returned the greeting, recalling that the man before him was also known as the Silver Lion Riloid, the young king who had inherited the throne after his father's death. Renowned for leading from the front in monster subjugations, Riloid was remembered for raising his sword high on the battlefield, his shining silver hair flowing like a lion's mane. Arthur introduced himself as the first prince of Roides and explained that since his father, the king, was unwell, he had come to meet him in his stead. Yet, as he spoke, he couldn't help but think to himself that, although everyone claimed the king of Idas was as fierce as a lion, judging from his appearance right now, he wondered whether the man could even properly wield a sword anymore. The king then remarked that since their nations were neighbors, there was no need for excessive formality. To Arthur's surprise, he specifically called out Marielle as well. That left Arthur momentarily confused, and even Marielle was startled to realize the king already knew about her. Before continuing, Riloid clarified that the weapon he carried and the knights at his side were merely precautionary measures. In fact, he intended to leave as soon as his business was concluded. He assured them he meant no offense and apologized if his arrival had unnecessarily startled anyone. Arthur accepted the explanation without hesitation, agreeing that it was only natural to be prepared for anything. He then expressed regret that he could not offer greater hospitality before moving straight to the point. Arthur explained that they were experiencing setbacks with monsters near the capital and formally requested permission to conduct necessary operations on Idas soil. If the king allowed this, he would be deeply grateful and promised his thanks for cooperating in eliminating the threat. Riloid appreciated his straightforwardness and readily agreed to help, but then he too became serious and revealed that he had come in search of two things. Puzzled, Arthur asked what those might be. First, Riloid inquired about the health of his father, saying he had heard that the king of Roides had been bedridden for nearly a year. The news deeply concerned him, for King Roides had long-standing ties with both him and his nation. Arthur thanked him for his concern and assured him that his father was receiving exceptional medical care and that his condition was stable. Riloid then brought up something heavier. About a year ago, the king of Roides had made a monumental decision. He declared that upon welcoming the wandering saint, Roides would monopolize her duty of healing the land during her journey across the nations. That declaration effectively ended the aid they had been receiving from neighboring countries ever since they lost their last saint 80 years ago. Yet within just a year, with the saint by their side, food supplies had flourished, monster threats diminished, public safety strengthened, and the economy began to thrive. The support they lost had been more than compensated by the blessings the saint brought, allowing them to push forward stronger than ever. Arthur agreed with his assessment and explained that this was precisely why Marielle was now with them. But before he could say more, Riloid raised his hand as if signaling his knights, and a tense stillness filled the room. He then pointed out that because of the decision the king of Roides had made a year ago, he had grown deeply troubled, for it meant the king was using the saint in the same way the rulers of old had once exploited them. Riloid said he knew this because the king himself had confided in him, even remarking that he might one day be cursed for it. Arthur, however, dismissed such notions. He did not believe in curses and could not understand the direction Riloid was trying to take this conversation. If curses truly existed, surely his father would have discussed them with him, his own successor. For that matter, Arthur could not comprehend why his father had never told him about the pact he apparently held with the king of Idas. Just then, something clicked for him, and he thought to himself, why had his father shared all of this with Riloid, and not with him? And why had Riloid come to visit now, of all times? In that moment, he began to piece everything together that had happened in recent time, how Idas was known to have multiple saints, this pact between the king of Roidas and the king of Idas, and finally, the saint who visited them a year ago had silver hair as well, just like King Riloid. He finally realized what was going on here, and he literally started sweating in fear. He tried to calm himself down, telling himself that that cannot be, and she was only a traveling saint, who was completely unrelated to this story and nothing more than that. But then, King Riloid simply smiled and stated that his intuitions were indeed sharp, hence confirming what he was thinking was true. Marielle, on the other hand, had no idea what was going on, and she guessed that the king was praising him, so she also started doing the same and said that the prince was indeed extraordinary. He always prioritized the entire kingdom, cared about his people, and always wanted to help. That's exactly why the whole kingdom was happy under him. Meanwhile, Arthur was also a bit confused as well because he did not know what she might say next, since he had told her to keep her mouth shut and just follow his lead. But then she did the exact thing that he wanted to avoid, and talked about how that false saint was getting in his way, leaving him completely stunned. Curious, the king asked her what kind of person this false saint was, and even though Arthur tried to stop her right there, she kept on going and told him that the false saint was a foolish impostor who flaunted her silver hair. All she could do was just steal from others and was a pathetic little pawn who got exposed for her scheme by none other than Arthur. It was also because of the false saint that Marielle was currently weak, and she betrayed Arthur and everyone in this country. To top it all off, she finally took Mira's name and called her a vile and filthy sinner who falsely took on the role of a saint, hence a false saint. Arthur was still trying to shut her up, however. It was already too late, and all of a sudden, they felt this chill in the room. They looked at the king, and he was staring at them with cold eyes and questioned her why she had stopped talking. Marielle was completely frozen in place while the knights also began staring at them. Arthur was terrified, and he covered his neck, almost as if he was in fear that they might cut his head off, while King Riloid called him out and asked him to tell him about what this false saint looked like. With his head down, he answered that she had silver hair. The king then asked him if she looked like a lowly woman who was plotting to ensnare others, and Arthur, still trembling in fear of death, answered that he did not mean that, but the king did not care what he meant, because in the end, he was the one who issued the order of her banishment as the acting king. Riloid finally told him that a year ago, that girl visited this kingdom in disguise at King Loidalus's personal request, and she served as a saint for the capital. But then, just after she announced her engagement to the prince to him, she was suddenly treated as a false saint and was banished disgracefully. So the main reason that he had come to pay them a visit today was because he was actually looking for his sister Mira. As soon as he heard that, Arthur was absolutely stunned, and yet again, he kept telling himself that he was not guilty and he did not know about anything. He tried to think of a way to put all the blame on somebody else, and just then, a name came up in his mind. He immediately put all the blame on Count Diallo and stated that he was the one who was behind everything. As a matter of fact, he was still out there spreading slander about her throughout the entire kingdom. He was clearly nervous, but he kept going and said that he and everybody else were all used by him, which had now led to irreparable damage. But then, the king quoted what Arthur had said to his men when he actually began to spread the rumors of her being a false saint. How he wanted his men to raise their voices to show her that she had no place in this country and make her understand the weight of her sins. The king knew about all that, and Arthur was left even more shocked because now, his second lie had also been caught. For what it's worth, Riloid complimented him that he had very loyal subjects who remembered every word he had said to them. But they were not going to help him, and the king stared straight into his eyes with a menacing look and making him shit his pants. However, the king remained calm and stated that his father's choice was very unwise. Riloid had no interest in pointing out other people's shortcomings, but he just wanted to say one thing to him because of his father's grace. He told Arthur that he was not fit for all of this at all. The moment he walked past him, Arthur fell on his knees as if all his strength had been sucked out from him. That's how terrified he was. Marielle was also still in shock, and before leaving, the king called her out and reminded her that she was a saint who was born in a land which was long devoid of lineage. Hence, the power to overcome miasma would only come in the next generation, meaning that she had no power herself whatsoever. With that said, he left the room, and outside, there was Arthur's butler and the priest. Riloid told him that he would formally discuss this matter later on, and the butler asked him if he was heading back already. He had prepared a welcoming event for him, however. The king turned around and said to him that there was no need for any of that, as he had no business staying in that place any longer now. With each passing day, it was becoming more and more obvious that, in just a few days, the aftereffects of Mira's barrier would completely lose their power. When that happened, monsters would flood into the royal capital like a broken dam. The soldiers forced to confront them would grow weary, and at that moment, everyone would wonder why Marielle was not displaying her powers even in such a dire situation, and why she wasn't showing herself at all. No matter how much she prayed, she would not be able to resolve the situation, and the life and wealth she had built over the past year would crumble before her very eyes. The neighboring nations of Adalas could not ignore the monsters either, but of course, they wouldn't help the royal capital for free. In that moment, when the land and the hearts of the people were in despair, King Riloid would surely emerge once again, and most likely he would demand Mira in return. Then he would announce himself as the Hand of Salvation, and as for who had brought such devastation upon the nation, all that panic, anger, and distrust would be directed at none other than Prince Arthur. He knew all that full well, and just thinking about it was starting to make him lose his mind. Now he was beginning to regret his decisions, thinking that if he had known her true identity earlier, he would never have done something like this or taken such extreme measures against her. But now, the roles have been completely reversed. What terrified him even more was the voice in his head telling him that he couldn't do anything anymore. If he confessed everything, the people would rage and turn against him. If he made excuses to save himself, it would only fuel Riloid's fury even further. He could already feel those lion fangs at his throat, and he knew that all he could do now was squirm in fear until he was devoured by them. He was just like a rat in a cage, and even this grand castle of his was beginning to feel like a prison. Just that morning he had been smiling at how smoothly the plan was going, and now he wished all of this were just a dream. But he knew it was real. On top of that, he was running out of time, because once the monster attacks began, there would be no turning back. Before that moment came, he needed to find a way to defend himself. He considered seeking support from other nations, but that was impossible since there was not a single country willing to help someone under Idas's watch. He wondered if he should assassinate Riloid, but quickly dismissed the idea, realizing that even if he succeeded, a full-scale war would be unavoidable. Then he got an idea. If he could find Mira before her brother did, perhaps he could convince her to set up a barrier around the capital. If he played his cards right, King Riloid might forgive him and give him a second chance. He decided to go with that idea for now, determined not to let anyone bring him down. He kept telling himself that everything belonged to him alone, and he was going to keep it that way. A few moments later, when he met with the priest, the man suggested that Arthur should chase after Riloid immediately, saying that a prince should care for his country, not himself, and should try to save as many people as possible. That was the best course of action for someone in his position. But that was not what Arthur wanted to hear. He snapped, questioning whether the priest even understood the kind of situation they were in. He reminded him that if he were to fall, the priest's involvement in all of this would be exposed as well, and then he would never become the high priest as he desired. But the priest simply chuckled and told him that, from the very start, all of it had been irrelevant to him. Arthur was shocked to hear that. The priest went on to say that it didn't matter to him whether he became the high priest or not, since the temple hadn't had a saint for over 80 years and therefore had no authority over anything. Besides, ever since his brother had inherited the title, he had been reduced to a mere priest anyway. He admitted that he had only entertained Arthur's schemes because he thought they might lead to something interesting, but everything had already fallen apart in just 10 days. The new saintess was useless, and the prince lacked any real backing. He mocked him further, saying that he was just a fool sinking the whole country while playing at command. Laughing in Arthur's face, he told him that even though he always believed he was smart and could control everything, in the end he was just an idiot. Enraged, Arthur yelled back, demanding if he had been planning to hide behind him all this time. Just then, Marielle interrupted them, insisting that she was not as incompetent as they thought. She was holding a protective charm named *Teed in her hand, explaining that she had managed to create one successfully after trying very hard. She was excited to show him, believing that by following his instructions and succeeding, she had proven herself a real saintess. However, Arthur didn't care in the slightest. He yelled at her instead, blaming her for putting him in this situation by saying unnecessary things in front of the king, and demanding to know why she was wasting time making charms. He told her flatly that if she couldn't manage to set up a barrier, then she was nothing more than a useless burden with no worth at all. Marielle was stunned by his words. At that moment his butler arrived and reported that Marielle was not of noble birth to begin with. From the orphanage inspection, it had been revealed that she had not been taken in 10 years ago, but since birth, and that the entire situation was nothing more than a sales pitch by Count Diallo, who craved the honor of reviving the saintess's bloodline. The priest began laughing, looking down on them, but Marielle refused to believe it. She started crying, insisting that the count himself had said she was his brother's child and that they would take care of her. She begged Arthur to forget about the orphanage for now and reminded him that he had promised her a shining life forever if she just followed his words. Annoyed, the prince told her to shut up, saying that unlike those with real power, she was beneath him. The priest only laughed harder, remarking that this must be why Arthur was so afraid of Mira. The prince froze at those words as the priest continued, saying that even though Mira possessed incomprehensible power, she wasn't from this country, and that fact always terrified Arthur. He went on mocking him, calling him a scared child trying to control things beyond his grasp. Arthur, enraged, dared him to repeat that, while Marielle, still clinging to him, pleaded to know if he would finally see her as a saintess and allow her to stay. Arthur shouted at her again, saying she had no right to even think of that, since she hadn't accomplished a single thing since coming there and was utterly useless. Her heart broke. In anger, she fired back, asking if he himself had done anything of substance. The monsters outside their walls weren't going to leave just because he yelled at them. Her words caught him off guard because deep down, he knew she was right, and in that moment, he recalled what King Riloid had told him earlier, that he was not cut out for the role he was trying to play. He finally started to lose his mind, thinking that literally everything and everyone were turning against him, and he shouted out loud, ordering the royal guards to stay alert while he ran to his room and locked himself in there. He was sweating head to toe, not knowing what to do now, but still, he kept telling himself that he was not in the wrong. He called in one of his men, who informed him that the number of monsters surrounding the capital were rapidly growing, and the castle guards could not handle this alone anymore. So he requested the prince to think about it, and just listen to the king of Edas if they wanted to have any hope of surviving this. However, Arthur did not care about any of that and ordered him to just shield him and nothing more. Every step that he took, he was scared for his life and contemplated that if only his brother and mother were still there, things would have been different. The people were starting to ask questions, wondering why the king of Edas visited the capital and why the saint still had not shown herself when they could clearly see the monsters even through their windows. They wanted answers from the prince. However, Arthur kept himself isolated as he did not have the strength to face the people. But then all of a sudden he felt that everything had quieted down. A woman came to meet him and expressed how honored she was to see King Arthur of Royalides. She explained that while she was traveling to the northern temple, she heard about the situation the royal capital was currently in, and to help them out, she had already taken care of every last monster that was outside the walls and sent them back to Earth with her cleansing power. Arthur could not believe what she was saying and was left shocked. He thanked her for her efforts and clarified that he was only the crown prince right now, not the king. She quickly apologized for assuming that and told him she had heard he was going to be the king of this land soon. She then formally introduced herself as Ariano, the walking saint, and stated that she wanted no position nor fame because she felt tremendous joy serving the true king with this power of hers that was bestowed upon her. As soon as he heard that, Arthur felt that this really was divine destiny, and the moment she had arrived, a huge load of tension was off of his shoulders. He asked her if she was ready to stay by his side and help this great nation with that power of hers. She smiled menacingly and promised that she would follow his every command, but little did he know, she was just like a snake who was simply reading her prey before completely devouring him. The scene finally shifted back to Mira, who was trying to collect some non-poison fruits that they could eat along their way, but most of them seemed toxic. Raul gave her a piece of advice and said that whenever she's harvesting, she should make sure to collect from the tip. She thanked him for teaching her things about surviving in the forest, while at the same time she could feel that the scent of her barrier was beginning to fade away. Since that was the case, she suggested they should hurry up because the night was going to catch up with them soon as well, and with that said, she took the lead. Later, they arrived in a town to restock their supplies, and she noticed that in the market, shops were running low on items since lately, everyone had been buying stuff like crazy. Everything was in chaos, which was to be expected with monsters drawing closer and holy maidens turning out to be fake. There was also a lake in the town that she found really beautiful, while Raul explained that many fellow traders relied on the supplies of this town as well. She then brought out the map, and after they were done stocking up and resting, they planned to head to the border along the mountain path. Meanwhile, Raul contemplated that since Diarlo's pursuers did not know their exact situation, they wouldn't be trying to do anything clever. However, at the same time, the two of them couldn't see the movements on the other side while hiding in the woods. Mira asked him if he thought those men had given up on them, and he agreed that it seemed like they had. Still, there was a good chance they could run into them again, so they needed to stay as low-key as possible and just act like wandering adventurers. There was one more thing she was curious about, so she asked him if he knew anything about those contracted mages from earlier. He explained that there were many mages who offered their skills as products, but some only took on partial contracts without owning a shop. Just then, a mysterious woman approached them and called out to Raul. It looked like she knew him from before and was surprised to see that he was actually traveling with a girl, which was quite a rare sight. Raul simply told her to leave the girl alone, since she had a habit of using explosive magic whenever she got startled. They ignored her and went on their way, while Mira remarked that magic wasn't all-powerful. It depended mostly on the user's strengths and weaknesses. Hence, he shouldn't underestimate how much stamina it drained. Raul appreciated her advice and thought to himself that if that was true, then the new holy maidens must be the same as well. Her power might be immense, but it wouldn't be limitless. On top of that, they still had to worry about Diarlo's soldiers, as he had no idea what kind of information they had on Mira. For all he knew, they might recognize her by her face, not just by her height. Plus, Mira's saintly powers were still a mystery. He had no idea how much she could endure when outnumbered by humans and monsters alike. Regardless, he was determined to protect her and take her to the border, just as he had promised. But as they walked by, it turned out that Diarlo's men were still on their trail, watching their every move from the shadows. Later in the evening, they went to an inn to rest for the night. Before heading to their rooms, Mira held his hand and wished him good night, which left him a little surprised. After that, she went to her room, lay down on her bed, and thought about how it had been 5 days since she had last slept in a proper bed. She then wondered why those men were after her in the first place, and guessed that it might be related to the strange events currently happening in the capital. Furthermore, she still felt guilty for not having told Raul everything sooner, especially after seeing how considerate he had been ever since they learned about those pursuers in the previous town. Just then, a shadow appeared outside her door and burned through the doorknob. Moments later, people shouted that someone had set a fire outside one of the rooms, and Raul rushed over to check on her. The door had been burnt shut, and nobody could seem to open it. However, he managed to force it open and ran inside to see if Mira was all right. She was lying on her bed, and as he closed the door behind him, he hurried to check if she was hurt. He wondered if Diarlo's men had already caught up to them, but then she stirred awake and asked if it was morning already. Raul sat down on a chair with a sigh of relief, glad to see that she was completely fine. After he told her what had happened outside, she explained that she had actually cast a barrier on her door, and by altering its properties, it would only allow Raul and herself to pass through. That explained why only he had been able to open the door, and she guessed that the lock must have broken because of it. Raul was surprised by how adaptable and clever she was, and he was beginning to understand why she wasn't afraid, even though it was just a princess and her maid traveling alone. He asked if her barrier extended to his room as well, but she admitted she had forgotten to inform the person concerned, which was one of the conditions for activating it. She apologized, and he simply smiled and assured her that it was fine, because in the end, all that mattered was her safety. Returning to the attempted kidnapping, Raul pointed out that there were many unnatural details. If they had really planned to abduct her while she was asleep, they had made a lot of noise, and their attempt seemed half-hearted. It could have been a random robbery instead of Diarlo's men, but that seemed unlikely. Thus, he concluded that whoever was targeting her had indeed reached her room. He decided they should leave the town immediately and told her to get her things ready. However, Mira noted that this incident had at least confirmed one thing. She could still feel traces of magic in the keyhole, which indicated that a mage had been involved. They had likely tried to unlock the door with magic, but her barrier had protected her. Raul asked if she had any idea who that mage might be, but she said she didn't know. Still, she could follow the magical trail like pulling on a thread. She suggested they move quickly, as she wanted to catch whoever did it before they left, and make them pay for damaging her door. Raul smiled and agreed that they should move out. Not long after, Diarlo's men finally reached the inn, unaware of what had just occurred. All they could hear from the townspeople was that a fire had broken out and that a drunk had set the place ablaze. However, one of them could tell that something was definitely off and decided to intercept anyone trying to leave the inn. Meanwhile, the monsters had begun to move as well, and a large insect-like creature was flying through the skies. A flashback is then shown to when Mira and Tuul just left the royal capital. Mira asked Tuul why they even needed a guard. She could just use her barrier spell to protect themselves, and then by taking it slow, they would reach Ada's in no time, without any worry. However, Tuul pointed out that Mira had no real combat experience and if they got ambushed along the way, they might not be able to respond in time. She even admitted that she herself was not strong enough, and besides, they could not predict the physical strain of varying the barrier's powers in intervals. Mira apologized for causing all this trouble, but Tool assured her it was not her fault. It was all because of those ungrateful fools who committed such outrageous acts by banishing her out of the country. However, being the gentle soul she was, Mira stated that blaming others wouldn't help them. Coming back to the present, she and Raul followed the magic trail, and at the end of it, it was the same lady who they had bumped into the other day. She played dumb, asking them why they had come to see her. Raul told her to confess whatever she was planning in that head of hers and warned her not to even think about running away now, as they could track her by her magical traces. The woman laughed hearing that they could see magical traces and asked him if he had really become the type who bluffs now. Raul got straight to the point and guessed that the doorknob must have melted from heat because she overexerted herself, but she, on the other hand, kept acting like she had no idea what they were talking about. So Mira showed one of her spells to her and told her if she really wanted evidence from them that she was the one who did it, she could provide plenty. As soon as she saw that, the woman was shocked, as she could not believe that a child like her was able to use an advanced barrier magic, and understood they might really have found magical traces. But then, instead of threatening her or anything, Mira simply asked her why she was trying to target her. She could understand if she hated her, and that was fine, but she wanted her to just focus her anger on her and not scare everyone around her or destroy their property. The woman had no idea how to respond to something like that and clarified that she did not even know who she was. In fact, she blamed Raul for all this. He was the one who straight up ignored her the other day when she came to say hi, and so she just thought she would annoy him a little. She then also mentioned that there were some Diarlo's soldiers lurking around as well, and they made her really annoyed by staring at her and interrogating her, and that immediately caught Raul's attention. She continued that if there was a commotion, she was sure they would come right away, and so she just wanted to make him experience what she did. She initially only wanted to mess with the lock to create a commotion, but it was already open, and then she overdid it and burned it instead. Raul, on the other hand, started looking around to see if they were being followed from the inn, while Mira asked her to apologize to the innkeeper and compensate for the door as well, which she did not mind at all. However, one look at the two of them, and she could see that Raul seemed unusually on edge right now, and as soon as she mentioned Diarlo, they both reacted to it and looked worried. She started to piece it all together and wondered if this girl in front of her was the same one who everyone had been talking about. But then again, if she was a fake saint, it did not explain how she was able to use magical detection in a barrier. She guessed that she must have some skills, so she decided to just straight up ask them, and she questioned Mira if she really was the fake saint. In response, she simply gestured to her to keep quiet and requested her not to tell anyone. The woman was taken aback, as she was not expecting a response like that at all, and she could not help but find her really cute. As they were about to leave, she stopped them and advised them that instead of going through the town, they should take the back roads behind her. She also briefed them about this gossip that was going on, and it said that the reason why Diarlo's soldiers were searching for the false saint was because of the pitiful and brave, true Saint Marielle, who was suffering in silence because of her, and they wanted to save her from the curse that was cast upon her by the false Saint Mira. What started as a small rumor had spread like wildfire throughout the nation, and now, all the recent accidents and illnesses were being pinned on Mira. The higher-ups wanted to expose her sins in front of the prince and the true saint to make everything right. On top of that, the count had received approval from the prince himself to capture her, which made it more credible. Adventurers and townsfolk were acting out for rewards since Mira was basically a wanted person now, and hearing all that just left her completely stunned. Raul was surprised to see that she was sharing all this useful information with them without asking for anything in return, but just then, Diarlo's soldiers caught up to them and ordered them not to move. However, before they could even do anything, Mira and the woman quickly used their magic and knocked them down to the ground. Raul used that opportunity and grabbed Mira to make a run for it, but before leaving, she thanked the woman for helping them, promising that they would meet again. She waved them both goodbye while the soldiers slowly got back and wondered where the girl had gone. She told them they were too late, as the one they were trying to capture had already escaped. Meanwhile, Raul and Mira decided to get out of the town and into the plains first, since mountains were also dangerous now because the soldiers had horses that were trained for the mountains and could move very fast. As for the towns, they could never be sure who to trust anymore. Up ahead there were fields and villages, and a little further than that, they would join the main road. He knew that the soldiers would catch up quickly if they kept going in a straight line, so he planned to narrow down their direction with this path. Just then, the soldiers came on their horses, yelling to aim for their limbs and capture them alive, while Raul quickly brought out his sword, ready to protect Mira. He told her to wait for his signal, however. Mira saw something coming towards them, and all of a sudden, a carriage went flying from right in front of them, leaving everyone completely stunned. Turns out, the flying insect-like monster had made its way and flew from right above them.